Hello, everyone. Welcome to the C Squared podcast recap of the Superbet Chess Classic Round 3. Today I was playing Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. It was also a big round in general because Jan Nepomniachtchi and Ding Liren were also playing in the third round, so that was going to be a big fight. But let's have a look at my game. I was going to play against Maxime today, and let's take a look at the moves. So I decided to start with first move d4 against Maxime. I wasn't 100% sure how he would respond to this. We've played a lot of games in the past in the Najdorf variation, which is in the Sicilian e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, cd4, knight d4, knight f6, knight c3, a6. This is Najdorf variation. It's Maxime's pet line, and we played so many games I can't even count how many in the past few years here. But I decided to take a different approach for the game today, and I played the first move d4. And Maxime is known as a die-hard Grunfeld player. He's been playing it his entire life. But earlier in this event, he played the Queen's Gambit accepted against Ding Liren. d5, c4, and d takes c4. And I wasn't sure. I thought it's a 50-50 whether he plays his beloved Grunfeld or if he decides to try out a new opening that he's been playing recently. But he decided to play his usual, knight f6, c4, g6. And after knight c3, d5, we would reach the Grunfeld main lines. But I decided to play a rare move, h4. H4 is an invention, I believe, of Alexander Grishuk, although I'm sure it was played before he introduced it to the top level. And Maxime has played against this numerous times. He's not unfamiliar with the line, but certainly it was a bit of a surprise coming from me. I have not played this line too much, I think. But I decided it's basically the best way to get a fight, because a lot of the Grunfeld main lines are leading to very theoretical draws, and h4 is a bit more unexplored. It's not very concrete. Black has many paths, many possible ways to play, and likewise white also has many possible ways to play. So Maxime decided to play bishop g7. I mean, the main point of h4 is that in the Grunfeld, black wants to play d5, but let's say first he develops his bishop, I play knight c3, and now d5 is not so good. It allows h5, and if black takes, then you lose the d5 pawn, and so this is why it's sort of avoiding Grunfeld lines. It's saying you can't really play your Grunfeld, but you can play King's Indian, where white is committed to h4. It's probably a better version of the King's Indian. You can play Benoni. White is again committed to h4. It's a better version of Benoni, or you can even play a Banco Gambit. And again, the h4 pawn is not really ideal in all those variations. So Maxime decided to castle. I was actually thinking he might play c5 here, d5, d6, e4. These are like the standard moves, but I thought that he might play this line, bishop to e2 here, similar to the game, but he's avoided castling. And he has played this line, and instead of castling now, he played knight bd7 against Ding Liren in the 2020 candidates. It might have actually been played in 2021 because the candidates that year was split into two halves due to COVID. And the game continued knight f3, queen e7. And I don't remember exactly how the game continued from this point forward, but it was some sort of very unclear mess. In fact, no, I'm thinking, sorry. Knight f3, I believe he played knight to g4. Now I'm remembering a little bit better. And then h5 and queen to e7 here. This was the game. Now my recollection of the line is coming back to me a little bit. And then I think Ding played bishop to g5, bishop takes c3, bc3, f6, bishop to f4, I'm thinking. And at some point, like in this position, I think this was the game, Maxime at some point played knight d5 and allowed knight to d4, something like this. So I was thinking maybe Maxime would go for that line, but instead he elected to castle first. And now e4, d6, bishop to e2, c5, d5. It's the same lines. White is trying to push the h5 pawn forward, supported by the bishop on e2. And in the early games in this line, they were playing e6. So black is trying to get some sort of, breakthrough in the center and using the e-file for the rook, for example, rook e8. And then they came up with this idea. So this was basically Grishuk's idea, that h6, bishop h8, and bishop to g5. And yeah, it's considered kind of very, very dangerous for black, all these lines. But it's now not where usually black is going. And there was, for example, some games like Maxime played against Grishuk with the black pieces. And also, for example, Hikaru played with black pieces against Gregorio Parin. And in a lot of games, black was struggling quite a lot. So Maxime didn't want to go for all that sharp stuff. He played b5. It's a Banco Gambit, basically. The difference is that usually in the Banco Gambit, white's pawn is not on h4, and usually it will never go to h4. Usually it goes to h3, where white can't really attack so easily with h5 here because black has so much counterplay on the queen side. So that's the point of going for this superior version of a Banco Gambit. So I played a4, take on b5, bishop b5. The point of a4 is that it basically supports the bishop and it stops knight takes e4 tactics. With the pawn in a2, black would have the option of knight takes e4, knight takes e4, queen a5, a typical tactic. But here, of course, the bishop on b5 is defended. This bishop is so strong that black should play bishop to a6. And here I had a decision, and even before the game, I wasn't sure which move I would make here, but while he was thinking a bit earlier, I decided, rather than lament over this decision at this point and waste my time, I would make my decision a bit earlier, and I decided to take on a6. So the reason why I was undecided was because bishop d2 is a very, very viable move. Black will take on b5, play, for example, rook takes a1 first, although many move orders can transpose. Queen takes a1, knight bd7. Now the pawn on b5 is still an extra pawn, but white is completely lacking development compared to black. Black has developed all the pieces, and white still hasn't castled, although white will castle quite soon. And this time aspect is the reason why black is doing okay in this position, where the pawn on b5 is very powerful. But after knight f3, queen to b6, short castle, and rook to b8. This was the game, actually, which was played between Maxime against Peter Svidler, but with the opposite colors. Maxime was with the white pieces. And the point of black's play is that very quickly knight is coming to e8, and then to c7. And after that, the b5 pawn will be targeted, and it can't really easily be defended by pieces. So white has to go for something concrete. Maxime played queen a6, knight to e8, rook a1, and the point being that after knight c7, he would take on b6, and rook takes b6 is met by rook to a7, and this wins a piece, if black is to fall for this. So Peter played this excellent move, king to f8, and it's a very nice little move. It's basically saying you can't improve your position so easily. And Maxime likewise continued with h5, and the position is very complex. It's objectively equal. But Maxime did win an absolutely beautiful game against Peter. I decided I could go for this. I had a feeling that he might not remember all the subtleties of that position super, super precisely. But I thought it's a rather simplified position, and he might be able to kind of calculate things and recall with a lot of time on the clock and figure out the path to a draw. So I decided to play a less forcing line, where I just take on a6, I play knight to f3, queen d7, I castle, and yeah, my pawn would be better on h3, but the argument is that in a Banco Gambit, even with the pawn on h4, white still has a pawn advantage, and if given time to consolidate, white would be doing well. So he played this move, queen g4, and I was already on my own. And I thought for quite some time here, because I was trying to understand the position. I was thinking, first of all, about bishop to g5. It was one of my main ideas. And I was thinking about rook to e1, which was the first move which came to mind. And the idea is that white very often is pushing e5, and rook to e1 will support that push. And so I was sure that he would play knight b4 after rook e1. And here I only played rook e1 when I saw my next move. So first I was looking at e5, d takes e5, rook takes e5. But then I saw that, for example, rook f to d8, which is not the only move, that if I take on e7, he has knight f takes d5, or knight b takes d5, and he gets a huge amount of activity, and my d-pawn actually becomes rather weak. So that's why I played the move bishop to g5 instead. Now, black would love to get some sort of counterplay, for example with c4. But bishop g5 is preparing e5. D takes e5, knight takes e5. And now the h4 pawn is no longer hanging. And if we enter an endgame where white has the extra pawn, and black may survive after a long, arduous defense, but nobody is thrilled about this sort of defensive task. So that's why I was sure he wouldn't play c4, because e5 looks very, very strong. And I thought he would play the move h6. And so it took me some time to calculate these lines. I should give up the bishop. And the point is why I give up the bishop. Usually you don't want to give up a bishop for a knight. But it takes a lot of the dynamic potential out of his position. He no longer has pressure with his knight on f6 to attack d5. He no longer can attack e4. And because d5 is no longer really a weakness, I can play e5 here. D takes e5, rook to e4. It's actually much better than knight takes e5. And for example, queen f5, queen e2. I follow up with rook to d1. And the e5 pawn is basically just dead. And I'm not sure when I will capture it, but at some point I will capture it with knight takes e5. My knight on c3 keeps d5 firmly defended, a4 firmly defended, and the a4 pawn is a long-term asset because it is a pass pawn. It's not promoting anytime soon, but it will at some point, probably deep in the endgame, become a very, very important asset. I thought that e takes f6 was an interesting move, stopping e5 forever. The downside is, of course, that d6 becomes a big weakness. Let's say he defends with rook f to d8, and I was thinking, for example, rook c1. I would love to consolidate with b3 and rook c4, defending a4, all pieces on light squares, but I wasn't sure after f5, rook c4, f takes e4, for example, not the only move, but I was looking in this direction, queen f5, and d5 is hanging a little bit. I can defend it all with knight c3, but I wasn't sure about this, and I think this was a very interesting direction for him to play, and probably, although he's worse, it's certainly not the end of the game. So he shocked me. He played knight to h5. And I just thought this move was impossible. But then it started to look rather unclear, but still, I only really considered one move here. I thought, okay, I can play queen d2, stopping knight to f4. I mean, I can do this. I'm certainly better, but it's definitely the game is continuing a lot. But of course, the move that I spent 99% of my time calculating was taking the pawn. Not only do I take the pawn, I also attack d6, I attack f8, everything's hanging, and he's sacrificing 2 pawns. He's going all in. And I don't know why he didn't consider this fully when he sacrificed the pawn. I think he basically saw knight f4 threatening mate, g3 only way to defend mate, and he probably saw the move knight b to d3 here, and thought, first of all, that bishop takes f8, allows devastation with queen h3 threatening mate on g2, take on f4, knight f4, and despite the huge material deficit, all my pieces cannot come to defend the queen g2 threat. And then he probably thought, okay, after knight b d3, if white makes a move, for example, rook e3, then black gives a check on h3, king goes, let's say, g2 or f1, knight h takes f2, followed by queen h3 check, attacking the queen on d1. He has a huge amount of activity, which is enough probably for an advantage there. But the reason that this doesn't work, and the move which I saw when I played bishop takes e7 was the move knight to g5. Now it defends against the queen h3. It defends against knight h3 check, and it forces the trade of queens. Queen d1. I'm surprised that Maxime anyway didn't go for this, because in the game what he did was not very good. And if he had done this, for example, rook a d1, a lot of things are hanging for him. For example, the knight on f4 is hanging, the rook on f8 is hanging, pawn d6 is hanging, and I'm up 2 pawns. But he plays this move knight takes b2. I take the rook on f8, he takes, let's say, with the king. And if I take on f4, then he has this bishop takes c3, and both my rooks are attacked. So I actually am not keeping the extra material, and I will still have a pawn advantage. But for example, rook to b1, bishop takes e1, rook takes b2, rook takes a4. Despite being a pawn up, a lot of my pawns are weak. My knight on g5 is going to maybe get kicked around, and he has a very powerful pass c pawn, and he would have good drawing chances here. However, Maxime saw the right move, and that move was knight b5. We discussed it after the game, and the important point is that the knight on f4 is left hanging. And for example, knight takes d1, rook takes d1. And yeah, probably white is going to win this position objectively, but a lot of work remains to be done. So I think he should have gone for this, these crazy lines that I was trying to calculate and I think more or less calculated successfully, but I was still not sure if I would be able to win there. Instead, Maxime played a move which to me seemed rather desperate, and I think that knight h5 was the first mistake, and this is the second mistake that he made. He made rook f to e8. Okay, it's clear, and I didn't really have to think too much about my next move because he attacks my bishop, but I take this pawn, and not only do I take a very important pawn, the bishop is also a very important defender because it defends against anything on f4. For example, knight b d3, I can simply take on f4 now. Knight takes f4, and he no longer has any threats. Knight to g5, for example, among other things. And now all his attacking potential leaves the game. Queen takes d1, rook a takes d1. I'm simply up 2 pawns, and the game is completely over. His point when he played rook f d8 was what he played in the game. Rook knight f d3, rook to e3. I thought a bit about this move because I suddenly realized his idea, which was that he takes on b2. So I'm still 2 pawns up. But then I saw that after queen to e2, he can play bishop takes c3. Usually you never want to give up the bishop, which defends your king side like this. But he had to because otherwise his knights are trapped. So he has to take on c3. And after rook c3, he takes upon a4. That was the point of bishop c3. And now he's down 1 pawn, but it still would be completely crushing for white after rook e3 because I'm up a pawn, but more importantly, I have the dominant center. And he would basically have to resign here, but he has this move knight c3. I saw this move, and I continued my calculation with queen to e1. And I thought that probably I have a huge advantage here. But it's very, very complex. He has moves like knight to b5. He has threats like knight c2 in the air at some moment. And I didn't really want to allow this, although objectively speaking, white probably does win this position just because the central pawns are so strong. However, I played the better move, queen to b3. Now the queen is not as well placed on b3 compared to e2, but it keeps cover of the a4 pawn. So now bishop takes c3 is simply pointless. I can just play rook takes c3. Queen takes c3, also good. And he can't take on a4, so he loses the game. The downside, of course, of queen b3 is that he can put his knight back, and I cannot take it on d3 because my queen is not protecting that square. Here I made a move which, to me, looked very, very natural and good. The first thing is that rook d1 was very tempting. But then I saw this move c4, queen c4, rook e to c8. And I was still tempted by bishop c7 here because, of course, I am 3 pawns up. And if I am not like tactically hanging something, then I should be winning. But then I saw this tactic, knight b2, queen b4, and bishop takes c3. Very important, not taking on d1. And suddenly things start to fall apart a bit. And white is not losing here, let's say, but certainly my advantage has gone away. So rook d1 was the first thing to avoid. Computer says bishop takes c5 is also a very good move. Knight c5, queen b4 is the point. But I thought that he might be able to win pawn back, and his bishop unopposed could give very, very good drawing chances. That's what I thought. I mean, it turns out white is winning there, but that's the reason I played the move e5. e5 was a move I was super happy to get in for a few reasons. First of all, his bishop is out of the game. Bishop on g7. It no longer attacks on c3. It no longer threatens to go to d4. And so on. So a lot of his attacking potential is gone. He cannot take on e5 because I defend him more times than he attacks it. So that would lose a piece. And very importantly, I get the e4 square for my knight. So if given time, I will probably play knight e4 next move. And for example, if bishop to h6, he tries to attack that rook. And I have knight g5 here, probably good. But knight to e4, even stronger. He can't take on e3 because knight to f6. So that e4 square is really, really important. If he plays c4 here, I play queen to d1. And I think that basically he loses his position because he is not winning my pawns anymore. He can't really even attack them. I'm threatening rook to e4. And I'm also threatening, for example, rook to b1. And his knights are a little bit loose, so he's not really threatening anything here. c4 is basically a one-move threat. Instead, he played f5. Very tricky move. I saw it was possible, but I thought it's probably kind of desperate, but it is probably the best chance as well. Now, the idea of f5 is he wants to play f4, and if I did nothing, like if I played a5, f4 would become a really, really dangerous threat, and I wouldn't want to allow that at all. And the other point is if I capture en passant, he takes on e3 with the rook, f takes e3, and queen takes f3, and things start to fall apart. Suddenly, my kingside defensive formation is completely shattered. So I, of course, cannot take en passant. I played the move knight to h2. So the reason I played this was I was trying to get a little bit, not really low on time, but 17 minutes I didn't want to get into a time trouble situation, so I decided to play knight h2. And if he plays queen d4, I would think. So I have two options here. One is rook to d1. I think that he didn't play queen d4 because of this move, but after c4, queen takes b4, he has this surprising shot, queen takes e3, fe3. Knight takes b4, bishop b4, and after this little tactical sequence, he takes on e5. And this position, I do have a winning position, maybe with d6, maybe even rook to c1, for example, should be winning. But even though I'm up material, I have a lot of weak pawns. And he has very active pieces, and if he starts to collect some pawns, he could get significant drawing chances. So I was thinking, instead of that, I would simply repeat the position, knight f3, queen g4. I got one move closer to the time control, and that's usually a smart thing to do. That you repeat once if you're lower on time in a winning position, because you can always just repeat the position and get one move closer to the time control, and you have less worries about the possible time trouble. And so I was going to think here, and there's a few really good ways, and I think one really good way to win, and maybe what I would have done, is move queen to d1. And this probably is how I would have continued, but white has many other possible moves here. One interesting move which a computer likes is, for example, rook to f1. With the idea of f4, it looks like really dangerous, but suddenly queen to c4. And the rook on f1 is just like a very good defensive piece. So anyway, he should have played queen d4, forced me to either choose rook d1 or repeat and go for something else. But instead, after knight to h2, he played the move queen to h3. After queen to h3, I realized that this is just a very bad move, because his idea of f4 is no longer on the cards. I played g takes f4, and his queen on h3 gets attacked, and he'll be forced to lose time. So he no longer really has threats with this move. And I have many ways to win here, but I think I found the most accurate, knight to e2. After I played knight e2, Maxime, after a little bit of thought, resigned. The main point of knight e2 is that after knight takes f2, I have this move knight to f4, trapping his queen, winning the queen. And in many other lines, for example, if he plays knight takes e5, I can play knight to f4 immediately, but I was even going to simplify it a bit. Bishop e5, rook e5, rook e5, and now knight to f4. And again, his queen is trapped on h3, he loses the queen and loses the game. And you'll see this theme in basically every line here, that once his knight on d3 goes, knight f4 is a threat. And his knight on d3 kind of has to move at some point because it's threatened. I'm threatening rook takes e3. I thought he would kind of throw in a c4, queen c4, and like rook a to c8, just to, attack my queen and see if maybe I get a bit nervous here. The problem is for him that basically I can put my queen anywhere. And queen d3, for example, he's down 3 pawns to start with. He still has to deal with rook takes d3 and also with knight to f4. And so that's why, basically, after knight e2, black is pretty much hopeless, and Maxime decided not to prolong his suffering anymore. He resigned the game. And that is how I won the third round. A very important victory for the tournament, although the tournament still has a long way to go. But nevertheless, +1 after 3 rounds, and especially after a rather easy game, is very important, and we'll see how the rest of the tournament goes. Thanks for watching, guys, and hopefully see you in a future recap.